Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I won't be very long at all. Just wanted to welcome you on behalf of the Institute for Public Policy and International Affairs at EUB. First of all, allow me to extend to all of you my best wishes for this new year. We hope that it will be, at all levels, a brighter and softer year. I'm very happy today to start 2025 with this closed event, but important, given the topic and given the current and latest developments in the region. I think without getting into too much details, but we all agree that what is happening in the region and mainly in Syria has highlighted a very strong role of Turkey. So we have a lot of questions on Turkey's geopolitical ambitions. We are at the eve of an American presidency that is pivotal probably for the whole world, but also for the region. And this is why it was very timely, and this is not at all planned before. A very good friend of mine, Dr. Soli Özel, who told me, I'm happening to be in Beirut early Jan, do you want me to do something at IFI? And we jumped on that, and the circumstances were very coincidental, so we're very happy of that. Thank you very much, Soli. And then I asked a very good colleague and a friend, Dr. Hilal Khashan from the Department of Political Science, to discuss. Hilal is a very good specialist of international affairs and of American politics, so I think that the debate will be a very interesting one. We will be very informal. I think Dr. Özel will take the floor for how much time do you need, Soli?
You tell me.
15 minutes, 20 minutes, 15 minutes? That's fine, and then Hilal will...
15 minutes in who's counting?
Arab counting, so 25 minutes. And you will take, and then we'll open the floor. Let's have it very informal and fluid. And
What about introducing?
of course, so I'll give you the floor. You are the master of ceremony. I just wanted to welcome people. And also to hope to see you here increasingly often, because we will multiply this kind of events in the coming future. Thank you. The floor is yours, Dr. Khashan. Thank you very much for having accepted to do this. Thanks.
It's my pleasure as always. It is my pleasure to present a distinguished speaker today, Mr. Soli Özel. Soli Özel has a master's degree in international relations from Johns Hopkins University. My sketch is impressive, and I can spend the next 90 minutes talking about it. So I'll be brief. You know, he's a faculty member at Qadir Has University in Istanbul, a lovely city. He has been a fellow at different places, more places that I can possibly count, and he taught among many other places at the distinguished Bogazici University. Mr. Özel will talk today about Turkey's renewed Middle Eastern ambitions and goals, constraints, and challenges, and there are a lot of them, by the way. What I will do briefly, since Mr. Özel will talk about the newest Turkish ambitions, I will simply talk for a few minutes about Turkish never-ending ambitions in Syria, or never-ending struggle. Turkey has been an important player in Syria's never-ending struggle that began in the early 1950s. Actually, Turkey's interest in Syria started in 1950, right after the election of Adnan Menderes and the victory of the Democratic Party. Menderes was a staunch enemy of communism, and he was close to the Hashemites in Jordan and Iraq. And when in the early 50s, actually in 1956, after the rise of the Syrian Communist Party and the threat that the Communist Party might stage a coup in Damascus, in a bid maybe to stall the rise of Turkey's leftist movement, Turkey sent mobilized troops to the Syrian border. And at that time, Egyptian president sent a contingent of Egyptian troops as a gesture of goodwill towards Syria. And then by the end of the year, the crisis was diffused. Then Turkey's interest in Syria in the 1950s was, and the 60s, I would say, was based on security. And Menderes did not view the merger between Syria and Egypt with favor. He was quoted saying that we went to sleep at night with 6 million Syrians to our south. We woke up in the morning to find that the population has jumped to 26 million people. And right after Syria walked out of the United Arab Republic in 1961, it was after. This was after Menderes was ousted, probably executed. That there was a relief in Turkey that the union between Syria and Egypt came to an end. And another burning issue between Syria and Turkey at the time was Hatay or al-Iskandaron, which the Syrians demanded. And Syrian insistence that Hatay was part of Syria continued until 1998 when Turkey and Syria signed the Adana Agreement, which gave Turkey the right to pursue the PKK in Syria, and the agreement also called on Syria's acquiescence to stop supporting Abdullah Öcalan and actually deporting him to Kenya. Now, in the 1980s, with the election of Najmuddin Erbakan, Turkey began to show more interest in the Arab world and Islamic countries. Actually, Erbakan established a committee of 8, not a committee, an organization of 8 Muslim developing countries that included, among others, Egypt. But in the major development came right after 1989 when, with the election of Turgut Özal. Turgut Özal wanted to open to the Arab countries, and he dispelled the narrative in Turkey that Arabs betrayed the Ottoman Empire toward its last years. In 1990, I believe, his political advisor coined the term neo-Ottomanism that was articulated by Cengiz Çandır's, I believe, at the time before it was picked later in toward the end of toward the beginning of the 21st century by what's his name, Davut Oglu. So Turkey's relations with Syria had ups and downs, and the relations continue. I mean, went for better after signing the Adana Agreement in 1998 until the beginning of the Syrian uprising. And I think it would be very important and very interesting to hear what Mr. Özel has to say about the challenges facing Turkey right now in Syria.
Thank you, Professor Khashan. Well, good afternoon to everyone. Believe it or not, I've come to this city many times since 1995, and I haven't been on this campus. Okay, and I'm very glad to be here. Maybe a couple of things to add. During the first Syrian civil war, 76 to 82, starting in the late 1970s, the military rulers as well supported Ikhwan against the Assad regime. And what we now call, or what the world calls, the jihadi highway was precisely the roads that they used back in from 78 to 82 as well. And in 1957, it was actually the Americans that stopped the war, putting pressure on Turkey as well. We tend to believe that President Erdogan was born under a lucky star, because whenever he finds himself in trouble, something happens and then he's off the hook. And I guess the fall of the Assad regime actually was such an event, and suddenly from being seen as a loser, not having accomplished his dream of unseating him, not being able to get Bashar al-Assad to actually speak with him, suddenly Assad was gone, and HTS is not controlled by Turkey totally, obviously, but certainly was supported, sustained, financed, and actually clothed by Turkey. Its leader is at the helm, and in the absence of Iran and Syria, which have been seriously weakened, suddenly Turkey in the north and maybe in Damascus has a lot of leeway. And if you read the foreign press, in my judgment, in a very exaggerated fashion, treat Erdogan and Turkey the way Erdogan's followers treat him. And it's, as I said, I think it's a bit exaggerated. But very briefly, if I may, I want to first give some background. How did we get here, and why what appeared to be a very successful Turkish foreign policy back in the early decade, in the first decade of AKP rule? By the way, they've been in power for 22 years. That's actually quite a long time, a single party rule, and that's about over 1/5 of the Turkish Republic's history, and it's 1/4 of Turkey's multi-party electoral system. So this is actually a pretty important one, and you can imagine that on those 22 years, Erdogan and his party, which is basically his party now, have put their stamp on the country as well. Maybe not exactly the way they wanted to, but in ways that are numerous. Okay. So the first time they came to power in 2002, and Professor Khashan has referred to him, it was Davutoğlu's argument that Turkey had to have a zero problems with neighbors. I don't call it policy, a principle in the conduct of its policy. And in a way, this reflected a rather non-ideological at the time approach to foreign policy, certainly to Turkey's neighborhood, not just in the Middle East, but also in Asia and certainly in Africa as well, whereby the new government wanted to open new markets for its business constituency, primarily. And that, by and large, was the driving force for their foreign policy. At the time, Turkey was, of course, we were all very enthusiastic about joining the European Union. Our negotiations with the EU have begun, and maybe it was all a dream, but it was a good dream while it lasted. And during those times, Turkey had undergone a lot of reforms that have liberalized its democracy, cut the impact of, or the grip of the military on Turkey's politics. So a really deep civilianization of the regime took place, and many in Turkey actually confused civilianization with democratization. When the tides turned, civilianization remained, but democratization has just gone out of the door. And this policy of zero problems with neighbors, or this principle of zero problems with neighbors, and a by and large non-ideological approach to foreign policy was basically changed overnight, if not on the 17th of December when Bouazizi burned himself in Tunisia, but definitely when Tahrir Square started in Egypt. And there I would argue Turkish foreign policy took a definitive turn towards a much more ideological orientation, whether one would call it a neo-Ottoman orientation, or as a colleague of mine, Behlül Özkan, analyzing everything that Davutoğlu has written from 1986 until 2011, argued a pan-Islamist vision is debatable, but there is no doubt that Turkish foreign policy in the wake of the Arab revolts has taken a very ideological direction, and in that ideological direction, of course, it was a kindred spirit to Ihwanism. And that is what the what the AKP had done. And I would also argue that it would, by putting the emphasis on Egypt and hoping that in Syria that would be repeated, they also sought to become the dominant Sunni power in the region. I would argue that 10 years after that aspiration or inspiration guided them, they had a bloody nose by 2021. And I thought Turkey was out of that game. And now, with the fall of Assad and the coming to power of, shall I call him Ashara or shall I call him Jolani? I don't know. Jolashara. Turkey obviously believes that it kind of gained something, and then it will have some influence over Syria's future. And I'm sure what people here and maybe in different Arab capitals of the region have in mind is whether or not this time around Turkey will have limited aspirations, limited goals, or will it go high on its so-called victory, again seek domination or hegemony in Syria or around in the region. But by the end of after 2021, in fact, after 2018, once Aleppo fell, Turkey's aspirations were really limited, and the goal of unseating Assad was replaced by the goal of containing the PYD-YPG, which was, of course, an extension of PKK, which is Turkey's mortal enemy. Okay, and then something happened which also shifted Turkey's orientation in its foreign policy, and that was the coup attempt of 2016 on the 15th of July. I am of the opinion that Turkey's allies left whether we like them or not, the legitimate elected government of Turkey hanging in the air. It was, in my judgment, the wrong thing to do, both politically and morally wrong thing to do. And that gave Mr. Erdogan the idea that the West wanted him out, and therefore his first trip after the coup attempt was to Russia, when he struck a deal to buy anti-aircraft missiles, the S-400s, which then poisoned Turkey's relations with its allies. Possibly one of the worst decisions ever made in Turkish Republican history was actually the purchase of those S-400s, because the result of which we were kicked out of the F-35 production program, on which the Turkish companies have already invested hundreds of millions of dollars. And as a result of those investments, it was expected that in the life of the F-35s, Turkey would get about between $12 to $15 billion worth of orders, not to mention the technological know-how transfers that the Turkish industry would benefit from. At any rate, so we got close to Russia. That led to questions, in rather idiotic questions of, is Turkey turning its back on the West? Should we keep Turkey on NATO? Is Turkey really an ally, and all that? There was some truth to these, although I think the ones who wanted Turkey out of NATO were exaggerating, and second, were not paying much attention to all those things that Turkey was actually militarily doing within NATO. In that, yes, our leaders believed, just like Mr. Putin in Russia and Mr. Xi in Beijing, and probably a number of others around the world, that the decline of the West was irreversible. We were moving inexorably towards a post-Western world, and therefore Turkey should be keeping its relations to the Western allies loose, that it didn't trust anywhere, and then broaden its alignments, keep Russia on the side, open itself up to Shanghai Cooperation Organization, or more recently to BRICS and stuff. And that degree of autonomous room for maneuver, which actually, because of a decline in American power for their own reasons, allowed countries, medium-sized regional powers such as Turkey a lot more leeway than they actually enjoyed, certainly during the Cold War and even in the unipolar period of the post-Cold War era. So I would argue that in the last 1 or 2 years, Turkey gradually, without admitting it, has returned to the Western fold, especially towards the United States. By the time Bashar al-Assad was removed, I think Turkish relations with the United States were much better than they have been in a long time. We no longer heard from the Americans anything about the S-400s, and the Turks were complaining about PYD, YPG, but the language that was being used was much less poisonous than it used to be. With the EU, relations were basically strictly transactional, getting money in return for not letting the Syrian refugees go to Europe. And Turkey definitely did not behave as if it seriously took its candidacy, moribund and probably comatose candidacy to be a member of the European Union seriously. We have friends in jail who are accused of nothing, and they're sentenced to life imprisonment and all that. So in a way, Turkey removed itself from the European understanding of what a European country ought to be like, and then presented itself as an autonomous regional power with much of its interest in the Middle East and maybe in Africa and Central Asia. Okay. So with the fall of the regime. Now, I think there is enough circumstantial evidence that the US was also knowledgeable about the move. I mean, one analyst in Washington, D.C., Charles Lister, reported, he's the first one that I'm aware of, maybe there were others, that in October, HTS, which has been trained by the Turks, which has been trained actually by some very surprising institutions as well in terms of how to conduct their diplomatic relations with the outside world, wanted to start the attack. Turkey stopped it. So if Turkey stopped it in October and an analyst in Washington actually knew about it, I suppose the American intelligence, the Pentagon and others were also in on that knowledge. And finally, Turkey gave the green light, and maybe in consultation with others. This is in the wake of what the Israelis had done, which was really breaking the back of Iranian axis of resistance and all its poles, Hamas, Hezbollah, bombing Iran, Iran not being able to retaliate, and at that moment of weakness, they gave the green light. I am of the opinion, like many others, until evidence comes to the contrary, that nobody expected the HTS to actually go to Damascus in 12 days and then see the end or the back of that regime. So I suppose that was the big surprise, and I'm not sure that any country at that particular moment on the 7th and 8th of December knew what to do with this new situation. I don't think anybody was actually prepared for it. But as I said earlier, this put Turkey at the center of discussions. I forgot, of course, to put the timer on. Sorry. Okay. Okay. So then I should go telegraphically. Turkey's two Astana, there was something called the Astana process. Iran and Russia would get together. It was mostly Russia and Turkey that decided what to do in Idlib and other places. If it were not for the Russian green light, Turkey could not have undertaken the military operations that it did. After all, the Russians controlled the airspace and all that. And precisely because of that, in the last 3 years, when Turkey really, really wanted to go in and attack the Kurds, it just couldn't do so because it did not receive a green light from either the Russians or, to a certain extent, from the Americans. So Turkey's two Astana partners are down, if not out. And they also, if you recall, they are also members of the so-called axis of authoritarians that the Americans are now presenting and drumming upon. That is China, North Korea, Russia, and Iran. So in that sense, those two countries, as I said, appear to be down. They may not be out, but obviously they cannot really call the shots in this region. And I suppose Russia's prestige has also been harmed by its inability to intervene to save the Syrian regime one more time. So Turkey is seen as a dominant power, along, of course, with Israel, which took the opportunity of the fall of Assad to occupy the rest of the Golan, from which I doubt they will leave they will go out anytime soon. And something actually fairly interesting to me, at least, happened since the fall of the regime. And that is, the trajectory of Turkish-Israeli relations have always been that even when there were conflicts, brouhahas, and all that, including Mavi Marmara, the incident when the Israelis attacked the aid ship and killed 10 Turkish citizens at the end, that the security relation between the two would not be harmed because it was a very important relation for both, and it was also kind of a stabilizing axis in the Middle East. The words, the comments emanating from Israel these days suggest for the first time that at least there is a line of thinking within Israel in their security circles that the Turkish relation is no longer as important as it used to be because Israel has won and the Abraham Accords are unshaken, but also that Turkish presence in the north and Turkish weight, possible or potential weight in the future of Syria might actually harm Israeli interests, and there were fears that the two sides may actually clash. I doubt that this will happen, or let's say I hope that cooler heads will prevail, and this will not happen, but that is a novelty as far as I am concerned. So what does Turkey wish to do in Syria? How does it wish to conduct itself? I do have to make a distinction between the way the foreign minister and the foreign ministry are conducting Turkish foreign policy vis-à-vis Syria, and of course the domestic futuhat, would you say that in Arabic? Conquest praising, hubristic, hysterical narrative that actually occupies the pages of newspapers that nobody reads and television programs that not any sane person would watch any longer. And I would go for the line that the foreign ministry and the foreign minister is pursuing, and the single most important element in that foreign policy in principle is we do not wish to go ahead, or we do not wish to overshadow Arab states. We do not wish to be appearing as if we are undermining their natural influence or natural relations with the new regime in Syria. I cannot prove this because I don't have access to higher echelons of power in our country. But I think I've had it from reliable sources. You know, at some point there was this reaction in Turkey. We were the first ones to go to Damascus. You know, Ibrahim Kalın famously prayed in the Umayyad Mosque and all that. So why did the foreign minister, the intelligence chief, and the defense minister first went to Saudi Arabia? Even I was like, And it turns out, or I was told, that the Turkish foreign ministry actually suggested to Mr. Ashara that if they were going to come to Turkey, they should go to Turkey last. So as not just offend, but not to make Arab regimes, particularly, I suppose, Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates, feel that they are being sidelined or condescended upon as the way Turkey tried to do between 2011 and I find this particular approach a lot wiser than personally a lot wiser than the earlier one. So our questions today, and I'll stop here, probably I ran over the 20 minutes. Turkey's problem remains the Kurds. The PYD, YPG, what to do with it. it is quite obvious that they will not do anything in the next 7 days. They will not do anything. They cannot do anything militarily until Trump sits in the Oval Office. I also think that the rhetoric of we will eradicate terrorism, we will decimate the terrorist organization is more for domestic consumption than what is likely to happen. And what I think is likely to happen, unless something goes totally wrong, the Americans will broker some kind of an agreement between PYD, YPG, and Turkey. They will disarm, that is, the Kurds will disarm immediately to the south of the border. I mean, really, Kobani is truly, literally a stone's throw away from Suruç, which is on the northern side of the border. I mean, I've been there. And then in Deir ez-Zor, the Kurds will have, obviously, some presence. And if they join the military, they want to join the military like the other militia groups as a collectivity, whereas Turkey would like them to join the military, if they will join the military, as individuals and not as the collectivity that YPG represents. But these are all open to negotiations, and Turkey will seek new accommodations and probably some degree of coordination with Saudi Arabia, because I can imagine Turkish contractors going to bed and dreaming of nothing but dollars in their dreams, because if Syria is going to be reconstructed, and if that reconstruction demands $400 to $500 billion, the Turks will, Turkey, especially construction companies, will have a field day. But for that to happen, somebody will have to cough up the money. The Americans will not. Turkey doesn't have it anyway, so it will have to be a little bit of from the Europeans, but I suppose from the Gulf. And I'll leave with this suggestion: if Turkey continues with that very careful, respectful foreign policy that the foreign minister in particular champions and actually practices, then it will ameliorate its relations with Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia is going to be the key partner for anyone, both in Syria and in Lebanon. And with your questions, I can develop some of these ideas further. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Soli. This was really fascinating, and I think you even brought some maybe new info to us, at least for me. Thanks for that, and really it was very well structured. I think that Professor Hilal will say a few words, commenting mainly on specifics, and then we'll open the floor. Please, Dr. Hilal.
For an informative presentation. I agree with you that Turkey has learned from the experience of the past decade and does not want to over-alarm Arab countries, and this was probably the reason why I accept that it suggested that the Syrian Minister of Foreign Affairs heads to Saudi Arabia first. Yeah, I fully agree with that. Well, after all, countries and people learn from their mistakes, not always. Now, I also agree with you, which is unusual for me, that the Kurdish question remains the burning issue for Turkey. Over the past few days, and especially after the fall of Assad's regime on December 8th, Israel has been drumming up support for the Kurds and demanding that the Kurds deserve a state. This probably will put the relations between Syria and Israel in Syria, the relations between Syria and between Turkey and Israel on a collision course in Israel. Now, I recall back on October 8, 2023, one day after Hamas launched its offensive outside the Gaza perimeter, Netanyahu said after he defeats Hamas, he will turn his attention to the northern front, that is Lebanon, and then by the time this war is over, he will transform the Middle East. And right after assassinating Hassan Nasrallah, he said, we have begun the process of transforming the Middle East. The question is, does transforming the Middle East end at ending Iran's so-called axis of resistance, or will Israel continue with its effort in order to transform the region in other ways, support redentist movements, maybe in Turkey or in Syria or in Iran? And as you know, this region is interactive and minority groups exist everywhere. So I think when it comes to Syria, I think the future of Syria will not be determined by the Arab countries of the Middle East. I think, as you mentioned, the two dominant powers in the region right now are Israel and Turkey. I think the situation in Syria, I mean, there will be definitely a struggle for Syria, mainly between Israel and Turkey. Of course, I would rule out the military showdown between the two countries, but it seems that Netanyahu views himself as having messianic objectives, and he wants to transform the region. And I suspect that this is the end of transforming the Middle East. Maybe he has an agenda that goes beyond Iran.
Okay, thank you,
Sure.
Hilal. Yes, sure. Soli, and then we'll start taking the...
I don't know where the ancient Greeks got their wisdom, but they were wise. So they gave us, or we inherited from them, a lot of words that over which we really need to spend time and think. Hubris is one. Hubris killed Turkey's ambitions. Hubris killed Iran's ambitions. And I really see no reason why hubris will not kill Israel's ambitions.
I hope so.
Honestly. Okay. Secondly, Turkey and Israel may appear to be the dominant presences in Syria today. One occupies the south, the other occupies the north. And there is a central authority which is going to be dependent on Western goodwill and Saudi money. So he will also have some say over what the future, how the future is going to unroll. And in my estimation, any hegemonic attempt that sidelines Arab countries, however weak the Arab world might appear and however disunited it might be, is unlikely to work. As for creating new countries, cessationist movements succeeding and stuff, I would refer you to 2017. In 2017, two things happened, right? ISIS was decimated. Okay, it's coming back, but it was the caliphate was decimated. The erosion of the borders, which Baghdadi, I suppose, claimed when they crossed the border between Syria and Iraq, that project was decimated. And the same year, the Kurds held their referendum. 82% of them voted for independence, and both the region and the world said, wonderful exercise in self-rule, self-assertion, self-determination. Now you've had it, satisfied yourselves, you will not have it. So I really think no country in the region could tolerate a change in borders, because you change the border in one place, the border is going to change everywhere, which is why I guess what Israel does with the rest of the Golan is going to be important, of course, and with the proviso that Israel annexed Golan Heights, right, that it occupied in '67. The United States recognized it under Trump, and Biden did not de-recognize that. So what does that tell us? I really have no idea, but that is the main exception that I see so far.
Okay, on that note, we'll open the floor. I have already one question from, I just ask you to quickly present yourself, introduce yourself, your name and where you, your institution, and then, if possible, a quick question. So Hussein, and then maybe Rami. Please, Hussein.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the invitation. My name is Hussein Tai. I represent Berghoff Foundation, German-based. Berghoff. Okay. Yes.
Can you be closer to the mic, please?
Yes. And there's so many points you made. Thank you so much. They're very interesting. I'm going to ask my question, and you decide if we have time to answer all of them. First of all, on the question, just on the point that you just made last in relations to the borders, there's this claim that the West Bank would be annexed. Who knows? Maybe if Sisi is paid enough, even Gaza will be annexed. So on that question, what would be Turkey's response if West Bank would be annexed? And my second question is, in terms of Russia, I'm a Finnish citizen, and I was a member of parliament in Finland a few years back. And for us, Russia is our biggest neighbor, and in many ways very interesting to see that relationship. We felt that Russia entering Ukraine resulted in us being in NATO, becoming a member of NATO, and that was a strategic mistake by Russia, because all of a sudden it got Sweden and Finland into NATO. By doing that, now it seems that it's going to be forced out of the Mediterranean due to the escalation in Syria. So how does this look like, in your opinion, from Moscow's perspective, given what's going on? And I don't believe in this, but some are saying that there was a deal made, you know, some kind of annexation in Ukraine vis-a-vis if Russia would, you know, leave maybe Syria alone or the Mediterranean alone for some others. And my third question is, and you touched upon this, but I would like to hear more. Since 2011, we've been hearing that there's this issue of a gas pipeline that comes either through Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Europe, or, for example, through Qatar, Iraq, Syria, and Europe, or through Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Syria, and Europe, so maybe Jordan. So now it seems that the issue of the gas pipeline is again on the table, and many regional countries are super interested at the moment in getting a piece of that gas that is already existing in Syria, billions of barrels, or the pipeline issue. So what is Turkey's interest in this issue of pipeline that might sideline its own Ceyhan and some other harbors? Thank you.
Okay, three questions. This deserves an answer, and then we'll I would have taken, but Hussein has put so many things on the table that we have to now give you the floor. I would add maybe, but this is very miniature, I mean, on the question of the borders, that even, but I hate to think it's possible, even the Lebanese border could be also in question if things go on like they seem to be going. But we have many other people in the room that could tackle this with more authority than I can. Please, Soli.
I mean, if the West Bank is annexed, Turkey certainly will not recognize it. Whether that changes anything, I don't know. But no, it will not recognize it, and it will. I mean, either if this happens, and it looks like it might, okay, nobody will recognize it, but everything will continue to be the same. I mean, if I came here 6 months ago, I would have said that, okay, after this carnage, massacres, genocide, whichever word you prefer to use for what had happened in Gaza, that one way or another, there would be some kind of a process at least, especially when the Saudis have also made clear that they will not normalize relations with Israel unless there was a credible peace plan, or road to peace on the table. That, of course, that conjecture has changed. You're absolutely right, and the Israelis may very well declare, taking advantage of Trump, the annexation of the West Bank. Will it work unless they deport all the Palestinians? I have doubts about it. So, but I also have doubts that there will be a Palestinian issue being discussed by the so-called international community. Instead of bringing it back to the center of politics in the Middle East and the world, Yahya Sinwar actually buried it even deeper, I'm afraid. It was a big miscalculation. As to Russia in Ukraine, look, to the best of my knowledge, the Russians will keep their bases. So if there was a deal, I don't think the deal was Ukrainian territory, which nobody is going to take away from them to begin with, so why should they negotiate on that? I mean, any peace deal or any ceasefire deal between Ukraine and Russia, advantageous to Russia or not advantageous to Russia, will stipulate or will in practice suggest that those 18% of the Ukrainian land that the Russians currently occupy are going to be Russian. The Ukrainians will not recognize it, and it will be like an East Germany situation. So you will claim that territory, but it really will not belong to you. If there is a wall and it breaks, I don't know, 50 years from now, then maybe Ukraine will be unified. So that deal, you know, Ukraine against Syria, that I don't buy. There are objective reasons to look at for the Russians not having been able to actually come, or not having wanted to come to the rescue of Bashar al-Assad. And then if he accidentally falls from the balcony as he's watching the river in Moscow, I would not be surprised either. So on the gas thing, Turkey's interest has always been to become a hub. It has a lot of pipelines, and how they look at any pipeline that might bypass Turkey, probably not very favorably, but this is not an issue that I follow closely. I thought you were going to ask about Eastern Mediterranean gas. Eastern Mediterranean gas is not enough gas to send to European markets. Moreover, we really don't know what the European markets are going to look like. So all those pipeline talks may basically be pipe dream talks, as far as I'm concerned. So we'll see. I mean, first of all, we need to have some stability in the region for things to settle a little bit, and then try to figure out how to reconstitute the region. Bibi is high on, you know, like, I created a new reality. He did create a new reality. I suppose not very many countries in the region are unhappy that Iran's back is broken. But then where do we go from here is going to be a far more difficult proposition than what Bibi might think he has accomplished. I do recommend, by the way, watch Bibi Files if you can find them. I mean, it's awful. And it also shows a very dangerous Israel, more intent on keeping the region unstable than maybe ever before. And so we had this discussion with friends yesterday, whether or not they would prefer an unstable or a stable Lebanon. Logic would suggest that a stable Lebanon, maybe an unstable Syria, but a stable Lebanon would make more sense for them. But I'm not sure that the Israelis are thinking straight these days. They're so drunk on their victory.
Yeah, one more thing. Turkey, in addition to its desire to becoming a hub, Turkey has an important grievance concerning its exclusive economic zone. Mm-hmm. And it virtually has nothing in the Eastern Mediterranean. And that's why it wants to sign a deal with Syria regarding its economic zones. It has nothing in the Aegean Sea. And while Turkey continues or hopes to drill in the Cypriot maritime waters, which are creating a problem with Greece and Cyprus, I don't think this issue of Turkey's exclusive economic zone will be hidden for long.
You may be right, but you also may be wrong.
Of course.
No. For the following reason.
Yeah.
Suddenly there is a lot of commotion in Cyprus.
Yeah.
There is a lot of commotion in Cyprus. You know, people are going to the south, people are going to the north. If there's going to be a new, I mean, to the extent that the Americans, before they leave, want to have some degree of cohesion in the region, the Cyprus issue will have to be resolved. And if the Cyprus issue is resolved, the Eastern Mediterranean crisis, the crisis we had in 2020, for the reasons that you've indicated, will disappear. Given the fact that Turkey since 2021 has not been as abrasive as it was back in 2020, also suggests to me that first, it found itself very lonely, and it doesn't want to repeat the experiment. And second, maybe this time the stubbornness of the Greek Cypriots will be broken, and then there may be a deal. And if there is a deal, it will be a different thing.
Okay, Rami?
Yeah, hi, I'm Rami Reyes. I'm the Lebanon director at the Institute for Palestine Studies. I wanted to ask something which you partially maybe answered regarding the Turkish foreign policy about Palestine. Of course, the rhetoric has been high. The concrete action maybe has been less visible in what Turkey stands for. And now that Israel has the upper hand, if I may say, in the Middle East in one way or another, in the sense that it has more occupied territories in the Golan, in South Lebanon, it has not fully withdrawn yet. It has something similar to the Adana agreement where it could target Hezbollah in Lebanon, just like Ankara could target the PKK. And with the new situation in Syria. Maybe you could just tell us a few words. How do you really see things are going in the future between Turkey and Israel now that they are slightly adjacent, if I may say, after the HTS took over?
Excellent question. If you allow me, Soli, just because we could run out of time. Sir?
Hi, Ben Craig from the Australian Embassy. Quite a discreet question. Australian Embassy. So HTS is not the only sympathetic partner, shall we say, for Turkey in Syria, and we know that the links with SNA are actually stronger. How do you see Turkey using HTS and SNA to achieve its goals in Syria? What's the role of SNA compared to HTS?
Let's take these two questions and then we'll continue. Sorry. Press the button.
I'll start with what I think is the easier one. Look, HTS, I suppose, was a much more serious military force than SNA has ever been. I mean, SNA's history is full of scandals in terms of their capabilities and discipline and all sorts of other things. They are fully dependent on Turkey, whereas HTS, I suppose, is not fully dependent on Turkey. Moreover, once in power, they will want to dissociate, if not dissociate themselves, certainly prove that they can act on their own and not necessarily taking commands from anyone. So as Shara gains more power, if he can, then he will be far more autonomous in his decisions. This is what I would expect. Would then Turkey use the SNA to push, to pressure him? That I really do not see. That I really do not see. As for what the future of, again, as I said, for me, this very aggressive language emanating from Israel and across the board almost, to me it's very surprising. I haven't had time to really digest it. Logically, it doesn't make sense to me. But if Turkey wishes to establish bases inside Syria, and some people apparently even entertain having one around Dera, then a clash becomes inevitable. I don't think, I hope that they will not do it, and maybe the guys who say Dera are fantasizing. But if Turkey establishes bases in Syria, then it will get the enmity not just of Israel, but also of Arab countries too, I would expect. And I hope we don't go in that direction. But a lot will, I mean, it's today what? It's been just a month and 6 days. It's too early. I have spoken with a colleague, a journalist who is in Damascus, and she had lived in Damascus before. So she knows the terrain, she does have sources, she talks to people, she travels. You know, well, there was a lot of joy, a lot of goodwill and whatever, and I understand the first gas supplies are arriving today in Syria and all that. But it's a very, very, very heavy agenda that these guys need to deal with. And a lot of things can go wrong. And unless Syria is stable, for us to talk about 1 year from now, 5 years from now, is very difficult, because we will be speaking without really anything tangible that we can actually base our talks on. Iran is out. I mean, Iran is down, but is it fully out? Russia is down, but is it fully out? All those militias who have not given up their weapons, what are they going to do? Whose payroll are they going to be on? And I mean, is the UAE, which has been a bit battered because they bet on Assad, will they stand still, or are they going to try to, budge in and try to get some space for themselves? All of those things to me are yet unknown, okay? And that's why what I find truly precious in the foreign minister's approach, at least, is that he wants to keep the dialogue open with the Saudis, and to the extent that possible, really coordinate those policies. And also, the Americans are in on it. I mean, how committed they will be, or how much energy and human resources they will spend on it, may also be an important question. And the answer to that we will only know after the 20th of January. I still doubt, though, that they will withdraw their personnel, their military personnel.
Yeah, my question is not about, sorry? Yeah, sorry. I'm Bashar Haidar. I'm professor of philosophy here at this university. My question is not about predicting the future, but explaining the past. It still puzzles me what happened that this kind of wisdom, very welcome wisdom, descended on the Turkish rulers, because their behavior seems to, in a way, be radically different from the early times of the revolution in Syria. They had pompous talk, ambitions, threats, no action. They let Aleppo, at the time where they could have actually conquered Aleppo and supported the rebels there, they abandoned the Syrian scene, except for Idlib and some places, and they concerned themselves with the Kurdish problem. And suddenly now you have a kind of great wisdom opens to the Arab world, especially Saudi Arabia, which at some point was a rival country, and this advice to Sharia to open up and to go first to the Arab countries and to give a kind of a moderate speech to the Western media. Suddenly we have a kind of way, a wiser, knowledgeable Turkey, which didn't exist, while it's the same ruling party, it's the same. I'm asking this question because is it something we can predict, that some changes happened in the mindset of the Turkish political elite that would also have an impact in the future? Because it is puzzling a bit. Is it Hakan Fidan who's behind that? Is he the new image of Turkey, or?
Since you are a philosophy professor, I'm tempted to answer you with Hegel, but as a practical matter, Keynes maybe, or Harold Macmillan, I guess, may be more appropriate. Events. I mean, you remember what presumably Keynes quipped when a woman asked him, I listened to you before on this particular topic. You said completely different things, so why are you saying what you just said? And Keynes says, when facts change, I change my mind, ma'am, what do you do? And I guess the 2011 to 2021 period was an eye-opener for Turkey, and it showed the limits of its capacity. And that was a big debate in the country. I mean, if you leave aside people that one should never take seriously in the media, a lot of serious people on both on the pro-government side and those who not particularly take sides, the issue of Turkey's capacity and the fact that Turkey tried to go way beyond its capacity after 2011 was seriously debated. The government may not have responded to it, saying, no, we didn't do it, or we did do it. But I think they learned their lessons. And I think it makes a difference that Fidan was also for a very long time the head of intelligence. So he knows the terrain probably much better than his predecessor, which probably should not even be mentioned anywhere. And he has a much more realistic assessment of the situation on the ground, what Turkey can and cannot do, and he does have the trust of the president. So that's what I attribute this newly emerging wisdom to, and also to the fact that when in 2021, for faults of their own, the ruling party, the president, has actually bankrupted the country. So the quest for normalizing relations with the Gulf countries in particular was partially a result of expediency. He needed money, and he didn't get it. Okay, and again now, if he wants to have some influence in Syria, in its reconstruction and whatever, he will need to he has to make sure that somebody is going to pick up the bill. And there is no other address to go to but the Gulf countries for that, for the financing of Syria's reconstruction. So the wisdom is a function, in short, of the facts and the failures of the period between 2011 and 2021, in my view.
Yuan, Department of Economics at the UB. Yeah, I want to continue on this. I mean, what if Saudi Arabia is not ready to invest billions in Syria? You know, after all, the domestic development plans are extremely costly. This is where MBS is focused, and actually they don't have enough oil revenues right now. They're borrowing massively outside to finance their ambition domestically. So what changes in your scenario if this doesn't happen? Now, second part of the question on economics, you know, Aleppo is the industrial center of Syria. You've studied that, Joe, in the past. And before 2011, Aleppo was Syria's exports through Turkey mostly were higher than Egyptian exports. So this was really an industrializing country, very successful entrepreneurs there, working very closely with Turkish entrepreneurs. So, you know, what potential is there? Maybe we should think of this the evolving Saudi-Turkish relation in the future as one of dividing roles in a way. And how do you see, you know, Turkish entrepreneurs' interest in Aleppo today? Do they need subcontractors?
Which, if I may, the last part, which maybe opens a leeway to something like a regionalized Syria where you will have different zones of influence for regional powers, which is something that Syria was about in the 50s and the 60s before the dictatorship. This is a hypothesis, and this could maybe reverberate on the entire Levant also in a way or another.
In all honesty, one of the best ideas that the AKP government, or Davutoğlu in particular, had early in their term, which went until 2011, was to actually make Turkey's neighborhood a free trade zone, a zone of economic cooperation. Nobody has ever come up with such a project before. It was always strategic, political, or whatever. And, you know, if you think about it, under the Ottoman Empire, Urfa, Aleppo, and Aintab, Aleppo, and Iskenderun were actually a whole economic zone. You know, they traded, they produced, and then Iskenderun was the port of exports. I see no reason why we should not try to actually create such economic zones as I think you're suggesting. And my view would be that especially the ones in Maraş and Gaziantep would be very interested in actually working on such a project, because I mean the Syrian refugees, along with that, I mean, okay, they were a problem. A lot of money was spent on them, but without them, which were actually working for slave wages, some of Turkish industry could not have survived the economic calamities that befell the country. So there is, in my judgment, there is a lot of potential there for economic cooperation across the border. And personally, I also think that making the borders in economic terms much more flexible would serve everybody's purposes. The real question is, it's always the Israelis. I mean, whether or not they will allow, let's say, the Saudis doing certain things, the Turks doing other things, trying to bring the economy of Syria to life, the economy of Lebanon to life, will that see that in their interest, or will they try to block it? I don't know the answer to that. I mean, I know the answer to that from history, whether or not they will do the same in the future. Will they be just relaxed if they could annex and nobody says a word Palestine, and then integrate themselves into the region's economic and political order? That remains to be seen.
Okay, if there's no other question, I have a question. When we exchanged Soli by mail in order to put up this workshop, you told me that you would be interested also to talk about the next Trump's administration and Turkey. So this is my question. As far as we know today, before the inauguration on Jan 20, what is the mapping within the Trump administration of the big nominations towards Turkey? What are their positions? What is their political culture? For example, but I could be completely wrong, the new National Security Advisor, Mike Waltz, is said to be member of a sort of pro-Kurdish lobby in the US. Others, I don't know. So how would this play out? And we have also enough statements by President Trump, at least twice this week, about Erdogan and Turkey, and it's very telling. Every time he's asked about Syria, he doesn't answer about Syria. He answers about Turkey and Erdogan with a very personalistic undertone. So what can we foresee from this Trump administration towards Turkey? Will it be a soft road or a bumpy road?
Trump did not appoint a single person in the national security team who has a good word to say about Turkey. I mean, Mark Rubio doesn't, Waltz doesn't, Tulsi Gabbard doesn't, I mean, none of them do. He is the only one. But then when he says, oh, he's a great man, he's a very powerful man, Erdogan, but I told him not to do something and he didn't. You don't know whether he's praising Erdogan or basically telling him, make sure that you don't go offline. He did have a personal relation with Erdogan, and I think our government was very happy that he won the elections. That happiness didn't last too long because they began to have, if you will, cold water in their ear too at some point. It may be bumpy. It will not be bumpy if the policies in Syria are well coordinated. Turkey, I mean, under normal circumstances, with all that rhetoric coming from Israel, there would be somebody in a position of authority who would respond harshly. They didn't, because if you respond to the Israelis and escalate, obviously you're not going to have good relations with the Trump administration. And given the fact that Russia is weaker today, no matter what happens in Ukraine, Iran is, and I want to talk a little bit about Iran. Iran is down, and we don't know what will happen if they go for the nuclear program and stuff. Turkey, which already made that decision, in spite of the fact that Sweden's accession was a bit, we made it more difficult than we actually was necessary anyway. Turkey is clearly in NATO, and it understood very well that it really cannot have its security intact unless there is NATO or there is relations with the US. Thirdly, beyond the personalistic things, there are two areas where Turkey and the United States will probably rebuild their relations. One is Africa. There is no NATO member that has simultaneously economic, diplomatic, educational, and military presence in Africa. And that presence works not just against Wagner to a certain extent, not very much perhaps, but also against Chinese influence, because China's economic relations with Africa are semi-colonial or totally colonial, you know, the debt trap and all that, whereas Turkey's are based on exchange. I mean, I once spent 8 hours in Rabat airport, and there were all these Turks, technicians, electricians, construction workers, and others that have been working in different countries of West Africa. So there is a real presence there. The same goes for Central Asia, which will also be the next, if you will, area of contestation between the United States and China. And that's why many plans that the Turks have, such as the Middle Corridor and stuff, both economically and strategically, are important ones. And until and unless Iran returns to the fold of the international community as a normal power, Turkey will have the advantage of geography. The moment Iran does return, though, I think the balance will change. So the next question is, what will the Americans do with Iran, and what kind of position will Turkey take if that decision is to attack, should they go on the nuclear program? And again, at this point, I don't know which way things are going to go, and maybe next year it will be easier to answer it.
With the addition of another irritant factor between Turkey and Iran, which is the fall of the way the Syria fell. I mean, Iran took it as a blow, and we like it or not, for them, in their perception, the blow was given by Turkey. So it adds also a certain element of irritation. I don't know how they will play out. I mean, they tried to mend fences within the Astana agreement, the Astana format, but now, as you said, it's over, it's dead. So they have to coexist, at least.
Turkey and Iran did not wage war against one another since 1638. They don't like one another, and they have done awful things to one another, but they also dance together. So, yeah, okay, you know, they killed a lot of Turks in Turkey, in Turkey in the 1990s. And apparently the Turks took some revenge on some. We don't know what they killed or what they did or whom they killed. So, yeah, this time the Iranians took the blow. I'm sure they believe they'll have their time to come back. But the Iranian question now becomes the critical question, which will have an impact on others. But what Isaac has said is probably the most significant thing. And it goes for not just Syria, but for Lebanon as well. If the resources are not there, who's going to finance very expensive reconstruction in both countries? Now, relatively, of course, Lebanon is an easier task, but Syria is colossal. And if you cannot stabilize Syria, how well can the Lebanese stabilization go, I suppose, is a big question as well.
Exactly, this is the question we will have here at the Institute and in the country, and with all people to think about for the coming months. And I think this is the huge challenge of this new political construction that we are having today. I think we have a new prime minister by now, maybe in the coming hours. So I think that everything now will have to be put on the table. If things go the way they are going, it will be Nawaf Salam, which is a complete surprise by now. Okay, so if Hilal wants to conclude, and then I'll conclude organizationally, please.
Yeah, well, you alluded to the uncertainty of the situation in Syria, and that the challenges are staggering. And the Iranians say that they haven't said their final word yet, and it's not over in Syria. I don't know what they can do. Now, there is a question that needs to be considered seriously over the next few months. What if Syria splinters? This is a possibility. And we need to remember that Syria, as weak as it has always been, is a fulcrum country. Changes in Syria impact the entire region. Yeah. This has been the case since the Battle of the Orontes in 1275 BC. Between the Hittites, and the Egyptians. So if Syria splinters, the entire region will be impacted.
Yeah, that's what I meant by the border.
Yeah.
And the regionalization.
Sure.
Okay, I think we had a very, very, very rich discussion. Thank you very much, Soli. Thank you very much, Hilal. It was really, I think, fascinating for me and very forward-looking. Thank you. But this has a price. You will not be allowed to exit this room if you don't click on the QR code that is here in order to be registered on our mailing list, because we need to keep you updated with our activities, and because we want to have the pleasure to have you here as much as you can. Second, which is a good news, there's a light lunch in the hall outside. And again, please join me in thank our distinguished speakers. Thank you, Soli. Thank you, Hilal. Thanks.